commonly known as just simply punk, is a subgenre of rock music that emerged during the mid-1970s but was stylistically rooted in the rock and roll of the 1950s and garage rock of the 1960s. Fed up with the technically demanding and highly polished elaborate studio productions of the then mainstream rock scene, the punk musicians of the 70s embraced a raw, do-it-yourself ethic and created short, fast-paced songs built on simple, free chord structures. Lyrics in punk are typically direct, anti-establishment, and focused on working-class frustrations, social alienation, and political issues, a stark contrast to what the punks saw as the self-absorbed and abstract themes of their 70s rock contemporaries. The traditional mainstream goal of getting signed to a major label in order to make platinum-selling albums and enjoy worldwide fame was scoffed at and thought to undermine the creative expression and authenticity. As a result, the fame and larger-than-life rock star status given to so many 70s artists was rejected in favor of a more accessible, egalitarian approach where anyone could form a band or label and no pretentious, arrogant rock star attitudes tolerated. By 1977, punk emerged as a major cultural force in the UK and US, thanks to popular bands like The Clash, Ramones, and the Sex Pistols, leading to a distinct punk subculture that expressed youthful rebellion through distinct clothing styles, such as t-shirts with purposely offensive graphics, leather jackets, studded or spiked bands, jewelry, bondage clothing, and safety pins. It seemed like every city in America in the late 70s, big or small, was affected by the punk craze, and Fresno, the heart of California's agricultural valley, was certainly no exception. We can't talk about the Fresno punk scene in the 80s without first mentioning the Subtractions. Formed in 1979 by bass player Richard Vineland, the Subtractions are considered by many to be the spiritual forefathers of the Fresno punk scene. As Fresno's first gigging punk band, they played some of the earliest punk shows in the city, and members Richard Vineland and guitarist Rick Renaud were central in spreading the music and culture of punk in town through their constant preaching, infectious passion, and knowledge of music. And it was associates of the band, like ex-guitarist Dale Stewart, who would go on and continue to build the Fresno punk scene after their breakup. One significant event in the history of Fresno punk is a show played by the Subtractions that took place on Wednesday, July 9th, 1980. This is when a big, out-of-town punk band played in Fresno for the first time at a show put on by the local Fresno punks. At the Belmont Ballroom, a popular venue used for live performances at the time, an estimated 400 to 500 punks showed up to see the popular Bay Area band Dead Kennedys with locals Short Order Cooks and the Subtractions. The popularity and overall success of this show inspired many Fresno punks to set up their own shows around town and to start their own local bands. The punk craze was officially underway in Fresno after this important show. In our investigation of Fresno's 80s punk scene, we were lucky to speak and probe the thoughtful minds of 4 individuals who all had a special and important role in the then burgeoning punk scene in Fresno. The first of these individuals, Vince Barella, got bit by the punk bug early and really took its do-it-yourself ethos to heart. Active in the Fresno punk scene from 1980 to 1987, Vince was initially just a passionate fan of the new music, but soon came to be one of the biggest and most notable gig promoters in town.
My name is Vince Barella, and I was active with the promoting and producing punk shows like in 82 to 87. It was like, the flyers, we had to just, I didn't hire anybody to make my flyers or anything like that. It was just, you had to scout out some halls and stuff, which was an adventure back in the day. Like I said, the way I got caught up into it. So we had to bend the rules to rent a hall. Like if I wanted, like a couple of, like the first show I ever did was the Fuck Ups and Cambodian Kids, and I can't remember their. Anyway, did that out at Easton Hall, and I just told the guy, like, hey, I got a bro that's coming back from the army, and we want to have a party for him, a welcome home party. We're gonna have a couple of bands maybe and some beer. And, oh yeah, you guys have fun, but stuff like that. And the other time I was, I got a buddy that's flying off to the service. There was always something like that. I was kind of knew the guys, haven't really liked the music, but I wanted to hire a Capital Punishment for a kegger. And that's where it started from. I wanted other people to hear what I was listening to. I was going to be selfish and say, I'm going to hold a kegger party, but you're going to have to listen to what I'm listening to. So I thought, well, I'm going to hire Capital Punishment. And I called up Dale, and it took off from there. It was real easy to go understand what that was, as far as we were just doing it ourselves. If you wanted to have a show, you did it yourself. I guess that's where it came from. Punk rock was so grassroots at the time. You know, it's like just, you know, people just getting together and enjoying that music. It wasn't so popular back in the early days.
Another local punk legend we were lucky to probe the memory of is Paul Cruikshank. A mainstay of the Fresno punk scene since moving to the city in 1984, Paul grew up in San Diego, where in 1980 he made his life-changing discovery of punk through the local skateboarding and surfing culture around town. After moving to Fresno, he quickly integrated into the local punk community, and soon enough was throwing his own shows, putting out local punk records, and even starting his own independent record store, Ragin' Records, where he still operates to this day.
I'm Paul Cruikshank. I own Ragin' Records. I'm a Fresno person as of 1984 anyway. I grew up in San Diego, Los Angeles. I am a father, a music person, a professional. I got into punk rock through skateboarding and surfing, which was very common in like 1980. If you were into skating and surfing in Southern California, good chance you got into punk rock. Everybody just kind of followed that trajectory. Then a lot of those same kids kind of flowed right out a year later, but I stayed. I got to a point where we had Tower Records, not Tower District Records. Tower Records was a chain that did really, really well. I mean, they got great stuff. We got to a point where I couldn't get Social Distortion's second record. It's like, I can't even get this here. So I started a store. And it really blew up. That store blew up. I started that at Belmont and Fresno Street. You know, little gang members everywhere fighting with hoses, you know, just like pieces of hoses. And so that store blew up really well and did well through the 80s and mid 90s. And then it actually kept going under a different name until 2010. So I started in 86, 87, and it went through 2010. But what it really taught me was, do it yourself. Later years I got a corporate job, but I didn't finish college, barely finished high school. But I think the reason I got that job and the reason I excelled at that job is I learned to do it myself. Nobody had to tell me to do anything or how to do anything. I just figured everything out myself. So really the do it yourself, and what it meant to me was that individuality, that critical thinking skills, the kind of liberal to a little bit left-leaning politics. It really informed my anti-racist, anti-homophobic, pro-women stance early in my life. But yeah, I did everything. I was in a couple of short-lived bands, but I did fanzines, I've done hundreds of shows, I put out records, I started the record stores. There wasn't a lot of people involved in the scene. There was only bands, there wasn't a lot of fanzines back then. It was bands and drinking and skateboarding. It wasn't like DC where there was bands and protests and everybody did a fanzine. No, that wasn't Fresno. So there wasn't a lot to be involved in.
An examination of Fresno's punk scene in the 80s would be fundamentally incomplete without mentioning its biggest, and some might say its best, local punk band of the 80s, Capital Punishment. Formed in 1981 by guitarist and Fresno punk mainstay Dale Stewart, Capital Punishment underwent several lineup changes before the classic lineup of Dale Stewart on guitar, Jocelyn Frideau on bass, Mike Branham on drums, and Ralph Loshbeach on vocals was solidified. It was with this lineup that Capital Punishment, along with 3 other popular local bands, Maniacs, Frigidettes, and Nazi Bits and the Jews, put Fresno on the nationwide punk map by being included on the now legendary hardcore punk compilation Not So Quiet on the Western Front, which received worldwide distribution and helped solidify Capital Punishment's reputation as one of Fresno's premier punk acts.
Yeah, that's an easy one, because they were a great international band too. I mean, Capital Punishment just wrote some records that were just ferocious. So I knew of Capital Punishment before I got here, from reading the scene reports in Flipside and Maximum Rock and Roll, and so I had already known of them. I heard some of their songs on a couple of compilations. So they were already well known in California for sure. They were on some international compilations, so they were known. They've become even more well known over the years, even to this day. They're really getting their due. Their records are getting expensive. in hardcore, they're very well respected.
They just got that sound. That's all I can. You just have to listen to it. It's just so fierce.
I like the Capital Punishment shows the most. I knew those songs so well, and we just all went apeshit. It's just, we went wild because they were so amazing. They were that good.
They really were linchpins for the scene when I got into it, because they almost every show they would be available to headline when there wasn't an out of town band that was more famous or had more notoriety globally or nationally in the punk scene. So I really appreciated that, and their lyrics were actually quite good. Their lyrics were pretty political for the times, during the Reagan administration, and let's go to El Salvador. And
There's approximately 22 documented locations and venues that hosted punk shows in Fresno from 1979 to 1986. Although some were used very rarely, or even just a single time, others, like the Knights of Columbus Hall, were popular and used quite often by the punk community. Other prominent spots included the Patterson Hall, Belmont Ballroom, and the Wilson Theater.
And he gave us a chance, and that was the first show at the Knights of Columbus. Was with, and again, it wasn't like a super big name band or anything like that, but it was just a band that everybody had heard about and liked, and it was at Special Forces, and a few other bands. I can't remember who they were right now, but that was the first one at Knights of Columbus, and I remember that show was halfway through the show. I think it was like Special Forces had just started their set, and the waitress comes back and she says, "Hey, Art wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "Oh shit." Okay, in my mind I'm thinking, "Okay, that's it. We had a chance." So he walked back, welcomes me in his office, sits down, sits at his desk, and he opens up this book. And in my head I'm thinking, "Okay, here comes the total. How much do I owe for the damn bathroom?" And this and that. And he's like, "Okay." And he did bring up, "Yeah, okay, there's no damage in the bathroom. He goes, but you know what? I'm going to take that. You're not going to get your deposit back." I was like, "Okay, that's cool. And what I got you here is any other dates you might be interested in?" And it took off. That was like it. He was like, "I like what you're doing. I've got no problem with it." He stated later, he goes, "Hell, I have more problems with quinceañeras and weddings." So after that, it took off, and Knights of Columbus became the place for a while.
Most of them were at Knights of Columbus. They did do the warehouse in Clovis, and it was a warehouse. It was like just where they recorded.
I think Knights of Columbus was the place.
Local scenester Hillary Robertson first got involved in the punk scene through just going to shows out of teenage angst and boredom, but soon enough was making a significant contribution to the community with the giant skateboard ramp in her backyard, which became a favorite spot for all local skate punks.
My name is Hillary Robertson, and I was just a young kid. So when I first found out about the punk rock scene, then I started going to shows, and we all became friends. One of the big roles I probably had is that my friends were all skateboarders, and I lived way out in the country, so my mom let them build a giant skateboard ramp in our backyard. So they kind of intermingled skateboarding and punk rock. So, because you're basically going, you're trying not to fit in, and for some reason that bothered them. Why are you trying to look like a weirdo? Or they would go, "Oh, you're queer," or "You're gay," or "You're," because if you dye your hair, there's people that would dye their hair pink back then. That was, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but back then it was it was really like, no one did that. People did not do that. Rick Struhar and Steve, they were in a band called Sad Boys. But before they were even in a band, we all used to hang out. They used to skate. So the girls, we were kind of like, we'd watch them skate. We'd go, they'd find pools. They'd skate in these pools, or they would come to my house. They'd skate on our back, my ramp. There's different people. But when we hung out, they would always be skating in a parking lot. I know, we'd be drinking beer. It didn't take much for us to have fun. I don't know. It was a really good time. I have very fond memories of those years. They did have a big impact on me.
Laurel Fawcett is another notable Fresno punk that we had the great pleasure of interviewing. Inspired by the nonconformist ethos and intense political messages of punk music, Laurel quickly took an interest in the punk scene.
My name's Laurel Fawcett, and I did not initially get involved in the punk scene because I was kind of too young, and also I didn't know anybody. But where I really took on the lifestyle, I guess you could say, was around 9th grade. and it was just the influence of being around people, and it resonated with me. I liked the music, but it wasn't the only music that I listened to. I liked the aesthetic, I liked the style, because it was, for lack of a better term, it was kind of non-binary. I thought maybe it was where gender roles weren't clearly defined and you weren't trying to fit into a set role. I liked the lyrics, especially if they were political. I tended to not enjoy lyrics that were the same old misogynist, just jock boy mentality kind of lyrics. So there was a lot of local band shows going on as opposed to big headliners. So you kind of knew these people. I liked that aspect of it too, is that after the show you would actually hang out with the performers. I felt like I was part of a community. And I think that is a theme of punk and other subculture movements. It's when people that feel like they don't fit into the mainstream want to belong to a community. Punk was an attitude and a movement that I think was rejecting kind of the baby boomer, privileged, hippie, peace and love, sort of free love, and being somewhat hedonistic, and really rejecting that, and more of a embracing that there's a dystopia going on, and that society is breaking down. And the style of dress and the lyrics and represents the dissatisfaction with, this is, we're not going to pretend that everything's fine. Whereas punk is not a monolith. It's just like an art form, in my opinion. I think punk really started as an art form. It certainly, that's what a lot of people say, how it started in London, New York. But yeah, I would say that punk is more of a artistic expression, lifestyle, and it can sort of be whatever it is you want to make of it.
Although there was plenty to appreciate in Fresno's 80s punk scene, there are inevitably some aspects that were not as ideal and less than welcome.
I'll tell you, a couple of white power skinheads showed up to one of my shows in like 86, and they had a couple of girls with them, and we were there. We didn't know who they were, but it's okay. We're looking at them, whatever. This scene was probably 60% Hispanic, and we're looking at these guys like, but it's my show. So people are a little bit, they have my back. They don't, nobody needs to get killed anywhere, but especially at my show, frankly. So we look back and these two guys take off their shirts, they have swastikas all over their body. We're like, hey, put your shirt on. The kids today might take that as, we allowed them, we didn't allow anything. But our job wasn't to just run everybody out of everything. We weren't the thought police, and we were actually smarter than that. So we didn't like what we saw, but we were just, don't step on our toes, we won't step on your toes. There was hundreds of us, we weren't afraid. Even two of us alone weren't afraid. We would have plowed right through those guys. Even one of us alone would have plowed through those guys. So the whole reaction of my friends, Fresno hardcore guys, again, all those guys were Hispanic except for me and maybe another guy, which is, look at those guys. Paul, look what they're doing. They got their shirts, look what they have. And I'd say, well, put your shirts on, guys. It's not, we're not liking what you're doing right there, So they put their shirts on, and then they started passing out literature. It's like, hey, pass out literature here, you're going to get your ass handed to you. And there's, again, one person could have done those guys in, and then the whole crowd, there's at least 40 of us that are just solid friends, You're not going to get one of us, you're going to get 5 of us. So then they did it again, took off their shirts, and my closest friends, 10 of them, they're like, hey, can we do it now? I said, well, it's been 3 times, they got their warnings, and it's only 2 guys went at one time. We could say it now because it's so long ago. Damon and Mojo just said, okay, it's on. And I've never seen so many lumps on 2 bodies in my life. And they were just smashing them they had them on the floor against the wall. And they were smashing these white power skinheads and just yelling the whole time, Mexican power, Mexican power. And that's a pretty powerful statement that I approved of it. And I had to stop them at some point. That was kind of my role, to stop it before it got too far out of hand.
Violence and the drugs were really bad, especially the drugs. And the exploitation of young women You know, at the time, it was normal. It was normalized. You know, this is a time when if you reported a rape or a sexual assault, you'd be asked, you know, well, what were you wearing? And, you know, it was a whole different approach to that. So.
To out-of-towners and touring bands, the punk scene in Fresno grew a reputation of being rowdy and somewhat hostile.
Fresno was kind of blacklisted, in my opinion, by a lot of bands traveling through the area for having a reputation of the local scene being very antagonistic and not welcoming. So not a safe place to play. A place where maybe your equipment would get stolen or you were going to be targeted and have things thrown at you. But that was probably happening in a lot of small towns. But there was kind of there definitely was a group of people that kind of did a locals only thing, which there's a lot of that. That's sort of tribal behavior that I think people tend to do, and just kind of stupid. So.
Although punk culture in the mid-'80s had manifested itself into the vibrant and active community in Fresno, towards the end of the decade, the scene started to experience a significant and not always positive transformation that clearly marked an end of an era.
It was a big party for me that I put together at the start, and it started to become more like getting approached by business people. Some of the gigs we had to do, we had to start getting more of, like bonded for insurance. So it just got to be more away from, to me, being fun. And then some of the aspects too was like just a lot more of the people I saw were in the scene at that time. It was kind of like too much drug use.
So sort of like as the awareness grew of the punk scene, a lot of people's parents were concerned about the violence, the sexual assaults, the drugs, the safety issues and moral issues. And so there was a lot of sensationalized publicity, and a lot of it was probably fairly accurate in terms of the concerns, but the tide turned against being open to it as an art form and looking at it more as like a thug life kind of situation.
People got older, staying together gets harder, things just change.
A lot of drugs got to people, a lot of alcohol, a lot of pregnancies. It's not like there was a lot of graduating out into big jobs. I think life got the best of most of us in that.
Today, in the year 2025, a vibrant and active punk scene can still be found and enjoyed in Fresno, all thanks to the focus, hard work, and passion from all the participants and contributors of the original 80s scene.
People tend to create really unique art and music when they're bored. Big cities foster a lot of creativity, and there's a lot more support for it. Fresno's a gritty town, and it always kind of has been. But there's definitely this energy that I see now that's very similar to what it used to be. It's just that I think it's easier now.
I'm not sure I understand everything that's going on today. It's very different. It's very different. But society's different. Back then, if you stepped on people's toes, you got it. Now you can step on people's toes and then hide behind the police. So there's that lack of accountability, lack of respect. You can disrespect somebody and purposely and then get away with it just because you can be that person. You could step on somebody's toes, then be a coward and hide behind somebody like the cops, which is crazy to me. So I think it's not nearly as dangerous, I can tell you that. There's no danger in it today. I'll be totally honest. It's just rock and roll today. It's not punk rock today. It's rock and roll. There's no there could be rebellion, but against what? Against what? And then the same goes with most of the old punkers. Most of them turned into their parents, so their rebellion wasn't really all that much either. In 1980, if you walked down the street with funny hair, you expected to get chased, literally. I'm running down the street from 5 stoners trying to get into Jack in the Box to lock the bathroom door, even with me inside. But today, I'm sure people aren't being chased down the street for funny hair. No, it's rock and roll today. What's at stake? Nothing. There's nothing at stake.
Although the glory days of the 80s Fresno punk scene has long come to an end, Everyone we interviewed looks back at these special, formative years with general positivity.
I would live it all again. I don't know that if I would have been a lifer like I have been, but I don't know that that's the best of choices. I probably could have. I always think of these people who say, well, I was a punk rocker. Well, the answer to that, a lot of people have said, well, if you were, you never were. Right? I never stopped. I never, most of my old friends were or are or whatever. But yeah, I would do it the young days for sure. Staying around, and I don't know if I would have done that over again.
I think Fresno was just a nice little road through. They had a nice little scene that I think most bands enjoyed playing for, and a lot of the locals really enthusiastic about seeing their bands and letting them know it. And it was just a little quick way to pick up some quick cash and get exposed.
Yeah, it was a really important part of my life because I was a kid. So I think learning to be kind of an individual, kind of stand up for you don't have to go along with what everyone else wants, or you don't have to do what everyone else wants to do. So I think that really is kind of the core thing. Like I could be an individual and express myself.
People having fun afterwards. Yeah, fuck yeah, that was bad. Fuck yeah. Just that kind of energy, just being able to have people saying that here in Fresno.
I think Fresno was unique in that it was a younger scene than most of the California scenes. Like in San Diego, I bet the average age was like 28 or something crazy. When I got here, the average age was probably 18 or 19. Like I said, it was more of a blood and guts scene here. It wasn't the raving intellectual scene, and it's very much so stayed that way for years. Which there's something to be proud about that too. And I was proud to be here. I was proud to be a part of that.
Because when you approached me and asked me to do an interview, I initially thought, oh boy, what's the point of this? But then I started realizing every time I come to Fresno and I'm driving around. Actually, yesterday I was driving down Van Ness south, going towards downtown, and there was this huge group of kids at this. It used to be an old motel, and they were all skateboarding. They had things set up, and I kind of slowed down, and I was like, wow, this was not a phase. And I don't think that movements like this are just a phase. I think they've been going on throughout history, where young people have a lot of energy and excitement and creative drive, and that's where all really good music and art comes from ultimately. And Fresno is a unique place that has a lot of that, and we get downgraded as an armpit and other kinds of dismissive terms, and I don't feel like that gives Fresno enough credit, because Fresno has had a lot to offer the arts and music scene.